Hi, my name is James Clark, and I'm the author of Fashion Merchandising Principles and Practice, second edition. This video that supports chapter 1, I will use as a way to introduce myself, but also the chapter and how it influences the remainder of the chapters that follow it. When I graduated from university, it was 1988, and we lived in a very different world. We didn't have technological capability to the extent that we have today. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have social media. We also didn't have the ability to buy fashion products from wherever we wanted to within the world, which we can do today. I could now log onto my phone and buy something from Brazil if I wanted to. We couldn't do that in 1988. The fashion industry, like all industries, was also heavily restricted in the way that it was able to operate. We had quota and trade agreements in place that limited the flow of stock between countries. We didn't have supranational organizations such as the EU in its current form, which allowed for cross-border free trade and movement of people. And most importantly, we didn't have a culture of innovation. Things were actually quite similar all the time. Nothing really changed. Things did, and they tended to be big, huge macro shocks, such as the very severe recession in the late 70s, early 1980s. But beyond that, things were fairly stable. Now think about the world today, and it's the polar opposite. We've got technology, we have the ability to trade freely around the world, but COVID-19, which is prevalent at the moment as I'm recording this video, is an interesting example of something that is a huge macro shock, but actually, rather than the recessions of the past that were huge shocks that we overcame and slowly emerged from, the pace of change at the moment is significant. And COVID is altering the way that we live our lives in a way that previous macro shocks did not. So why did I write the book? Well, the first edition was, I actually started that in about 2010, got it finished in 2014, and it was published in 2015. And at the time, it was very clear that the fashion industry was moving significantly towards a new mode of operation. And I was very keen to update the book as quickly as I could. Here we are in 2020, and the second edition is complete. And in rewriting it or adjusting it, several thoughts came into my mind. Number one, a lot of the examples given in the first edition are no longer relevant, either because the companies have disappeared from the high street, or because the way that they work and the evidence that they provided in that last book is either no longer relevant or is subtly different that renders those examples not the best ones that I could use. Second, we have a significant amount of innovation at the moment within the industry. There's a lot of buzz around sustainability and about a permanent shift towards conscious consumption. But there's also new ways of retailing fashion product. We have new business models emerging. We have things like Etsy, we have Farfetch, we have Nordstrom Local, and we see existing large players, JCPenney, Kmart, Debenhams here in the UK, David Jones in Australia, all beginning to suffer and they're seemingly unable to compete in the new world. And that led me to think, well, we do need to update what we've done. So when I approached writing or reviewing for the second edition, the one thing that I didn't want to do is I didn't want to move away from the idea that this book is about principles and practice. It's not about buzzwords. It's not about the latest big thing that is busy and important and has lots and lots of noise now, but will disappear in a year or two. It's rooted in the past. It's rooted in the basics that drive retail businesses, in that they are set up to create product either themselves or to buy it from somebody else, to retail to a small local community or their target market. It doesn't have to be local, of course, and do so at a profit. And those principles are the same for whatever business operation there is. So therefore, I have stuck to the structure of the last book predominantly. There are some changes in part 3. I have kept the running case study through part 2 of the book true to the original edition that came out in 2014, because that sets the basics, and it sets a holistic basic rather than a particular business model type. So what experience do I have to justify me writing a book? Well, as I say, I left university in 1988 and I went to work for a stationery shop called Ryman here in the UK. And I went there because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was 22. I had no real game plan for my future, and I wanted to sort of have an opportunity to earn some money so I could have some fun, but also just spend some time thinking about what I was going to do. And it was while it was there, I became fascinated with the idea of stock flow. Bearing in mind, we didn't have 24-hour-a-day online trading. We didn't have data sets to the extent that we have today. It was a miracle. It was a puzzle that we were always in stock. And I couldn't work out how that worked because we had no way of really recording sales, but we always seemed to have the right amount. And I was very lucky then that one day I thought I would ring up head office and just ask them how they did it. And I spoke to this very nice man called Norman, who told me all about it. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. And then I went to Debenhams, where I trained within women's wear, moving over to lingerie nightwear before going over to Champion Sport. I then went to Jaeger, House of Fraser, before moving into academia. And in my time, there are 2 key points of my career that really made me, I think, fully understand what I was doing. The first was when I was at Debenhams. I was having a chat with a senior merchandiser. I was an assistant merchandiser at the time. He was telling me about how he had increased profits on his department by reducing the number of options available. And that seemed counterintuitive to me. How can you make more money out of less product to sell? And that really got my little brain working. I thought to myself, there must be something about balance. There must be something about targeting product. There must be something about getting a hit rate that is so good that you don't need to worry about all the also-rans within your range. The second pivotal point came a few years later when I was in House of Fraser, and I was working on women's wear classics at the time, and we decided that we were going to put a range together, which we bought from a wholesale brand. And the buyer that I worked with put the range together, and I couldn't get it to balance. No matter what I did, I found that we wanted to spend too much money on what we could afford. And I sort of was puzzled. I was thinking, I don't know why we're in this position. So I went in to see my head of merchandising. I was a merchandiser at the time. And I said what the problem was. And she said to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said to her, I don't have the confidence to tell the buyer that her range is too big or too small or made up of wrong pieces, because that's not my skill set. But my skill set is that I know that we will never sell all of this range because we don't have enough of the key pieces within the range. And she then said to me, so what do you want to do? And I said to her, I would like you to authorize an overbuy, and I will do targeted buys on key pieces that I think will carry the rest of the range. And she said, okay, let's do it. And that range was very successful. And that told me a lot about commercial decision making and making the right decision at the right time, even though it might seem to go against the rules and laws of financial planning. So those two key points of my career are really what I try to get across within the book. Moving on to chapter 1, which is the first chapter of the book, and therefore the chapter that really sets the scene, what I have provided you with is the context of the fashion industry, the context of industry deregulation, the changing players in the market, the way that the market has evolved, but also how those influence the role of the merchandiser, and how if you have that global view that surrounds you at all times, it allows you to make contextual decisions with certainty, or as certain as you can get. If you don't have that global view, if you don't know what's going on in the market around you, then the decisions that you make are myopic. They are internally focused on what you want to achieve rather than what the world is telling you you have to achieve. From there, part 1 moves into an introduction to the merchandiser role. We touch on buying as well, and how the role is structured and how it fulfills its activities. Part 2 looks at the running case study, the Prentice Day menswear case study, which examples the role in fairly simplistic terms, because this is a small book. It isn't a thesis, for example, for a PhD. And then finally, part 3, we talk about new prevailing ways of working. We talk about the international differences in the merchandiser role. We talk about e-commerce and how that is influencing the basics. Don't forget, this is the basic, this is the principles behind fashion merchandising, and e-commerce is led on to say how things are mutating or evolving within the new e-commerce context. Then we look at supply chain, and importantly, supply chain visibility, and then finally sustainability, which is the cultural change that is probably most affecting the fashion industry at the moment. And I thought that was important to have that last. I wanted that to be the final point that you think about as you complete the book. And I'm really pleased that throughout the book, I've been able to get some fantastic support from industry and academic colleagues who have given you insights into their world, real life insights. We have GS1 Global Standards, who talk about supply chain visibility. We have a fantastic piece, the very last part of the book, the very last section of the book is a wonderful piece on artificial intelligence written by a colleague of mine at IBM. I heartily recommend you looking at that. We also have contributions from fellow academics, and we also have a wonderful contribution from a merchandising recruitment consultant who talks about the role from her perspective. So I do hope you enjoy the book. I do hope you find it useful. And there are videos like this to accompany all of the chapters for you to view prior to reading. Good luck with the book and good luck with all that you do.